Hey guys, it's Lee Taylor, and these are the 2021 Hyundai Kona Highlander and Inline Premium, and this is a Right Lane review. If you had told me 10 years ago that Hyundai was going to be a top-rated mainstream contender, I probably would have rolled my eyes at you. Fast forward to 2021, and the Korean brand has found its stride. A whole slew of sharp-looking models, all of which are new or freshly updated. Hyundai is really bulking up against its Japanese competitors. So for the last few years, Hyundai's done a really good job of grabbing a bigger piece of the Australian market, and a lot of that is thanks to the Kona. Now, the Kona actually occupies almost every single space within the small SUV niche, but with us today are Jekyll and Hyde, the all-around Highlander, which is the more luxurious model, and the Inline Premium, something with a little bit more spice. So what's it like to drive the Konas once you get them out and about? Well, from a livability perspective and what you actually interact with in the cockpit, there's not a lot of difference. Where they start really showing their difference between the Highlander and the Inline is in dynamics, and we'll get to that in a second. But when you're sitting in the car and you're driving it around, there's plenty of things to enjoy with the Konas in general. You get the beautiful driver's display directly in front of you, gives all the information you ever need, a nice heads-up display. Everything is directly in hand. You don't really have many issues when it comes to ergonomics with Hyundais. You can see out of them really well. You sit nice and high, which is good. You can see out of the car. You have Hyundai's suite of safety systems known as Safety Sense, which is probably one of the better ones in this sort of segment of vehicle that isn't a premium car. And this includes things like adaptive cruise control, which has a lane keeping assist element to it, which is actually quite intuitive. Blind spot monitors, cross traffic alert, front and rear. It'll actually even tell you if there's a cyclist coming up on you if you're going to open the door, which is a nice touch. And there's some great things to enjoy in the Hyundais, and Hyundais do a lot of local tuning themselves. So they spend a lot of time here in Australia making sure the cars are fit for the market. That shows. Now, when you get into dynamics with the Kona, that's where the Highlander and the Inlines start diverging a bit. So the Highlander is the top tier commuter model, we'll call it that. And the Inline is supposed to be the top tier model period until you get onto the in-performance Kona, which is coming later in the year. So with the Highlander, you have a 2-liter inline 4-cylinder, no turbos or superchargers, just a little naturally aspirated 4-cylinder. It's attached to a Cvt transmission, and it makes about 110 kilowatts and powers the front wheels only. Now, when you jump up to an Inline or an Inline Premium, like the car we're in at the moment, because I can't be 2 places at once, you get a 1.6-liter turbocharged petrol engine, also a 4-cylinder, about 145 kilowatts, maybe a little bit more, 200 newton meters of torque, and this system goes through a 6-speed dual clutch automatic and a all-wheel drive system, which is new for the Kona. Now, dynamically, they just approach things a bit differently. So we'll start with the Highlander. The Highlander is the smoother option of the two. So its suspension tuning is a bit more relaxed. It feels great when you're driving it around town. Actually, it's quite comfortable on the open road. Everything's locally tuned, so it feels really nice. It's easy to park, easy to maneuver. It's light on its feet, but doesn't feel particularly sporting, mainly because the steering is actually quite light and there's not a lot of feedback, but that's what you want in a commuter car. You don't want the car to beat you up when you're driving along. The Cvt transmission is actually a really good CVT unit, which is something I don't often say about CVTs in general. I've historically disliked them, but they're getting better and better, and Hyundai actually has a quite good CVT unit. It's responsive for the unit that it is. The 2-liter is not going to win any drag races, but it does the job perfectly well. And to be honest with you, it's actually quite nice to drive, especially in an urban environment, because it toddles along with no issue. It's responsive, and it gets you where you need to be. Now, when you jump into the Inline, you're jumping into a bit of a sportier model. So with the i30 Inline, for example, I said it reminded me of a early hot hatch, and that engine is in this same car, but this car is a bit heavier, despite the fact that the Kona and the i30 share a common platform. And the main reason for that is this all-wheel drive system. Now, I actually like the dynamics of the Inline quite a lot. It feels light on its feet, it's responsive. The steering could be a bit more intuitive, but I reckon we'll get that on the in-performance model later in the year. And it feels good. it's nice and lively. I actually quite like it. I wish it was a manual. I wish I could get an inline Kona in a manual because I reckon it would be actually fabulous. This suspension tuning is good. It's stiff, but it's not too stiff, even out on the open freeway. It's light on its feet. The all-wheel drive system seems fairly intuitive. Like you can feel it moving around the background if it's slippery, but only when you need it. And you actually have the option to lock the all-wheel drive system out, so it splits 50-50 both sides. If you're out on the road, or you're out off-road, like light trails or mud or that sort of thing. I would never take this car off-road heavily, but if you're doing a little bit of kayaking or maybe a bit of camping, it should be perfectly fine. The downside to the inline Kona is the fact that you have this dual clutch unit. My primary concern with this car is actually the calibration of that unit. It feels rough, and it almost feels like early dual clutch rough, which is not good. So, for example, if you leave it in normal or smart mode, it toddles along okay, but it has a few hiccups here and there. The main issue I have with this particular car sometimes is the fact that your first and second gear under load is quite abrupt, and not in a good way. So for example, we get a first and second gear change off a stoplight in sport mode. You put your foot down, the all-wheel drive system sorts out where the power is supposed to go, and it takes off. That gear change from first to second is brutal, and not in the same way that it's brutal in an M car or some of the M235s that I talked about earlier in the year, or even the Megane that had a dual clutch. That's like a harsh bam, and it goes, and it feels like you're making progress. The harshness of the gear change in the Kona feels like the gearbox is coming out. It's not pleasant at all, and it sends this horrific thud through the steering wheel, and it makes actually quite a clattering noise, and it just doesn't feel natural, or it doesn't feel thought out. So it's probably perfectly safe, but it's not well calibrated. And around town, the inline struggles to keep up with stop and go traffic. So the dual clutch just kind of gets confused really easily and loses its way. Sometimes it kind of pauses when it shouldn't pause, particularly around roundabouts. And I actually had this gripe about the Tucson last year that I drove that had a dual clutch transmission and this 1.6, but no all-wheel drive system. So it could be something to do with this drivetrain. And hopefully Hyundai eventually sort it out, but that's my biggest gripe with it. And ironically, because of that calibration in this dual clutch unit, I actually find that I prefer the CVT in the Kona because it's smoother. Now, when you get this car out on the open road, if you're not doing a lot of stop and go traffic, or you're mainly on the freeway, for example, you very rarely find the dual clutch messes up. It just doesn't do well with a medium to low speed environment. And that's just par for the course, really. Just kind of the deal. So I guess the moral of the story is, if you want a smooth commuter and you're not really worried about, a high engagement factor, the Highlander is probably enough. It's $6,000 cheaper. But if you want a bit of sportiness and you're not going to be driving in an urban environment very often or very little, the inline is perfectly fine. If you want proper performance, wait 6 months for that in performance, because I'm telling you, that's going to be a firecracker. So how's life in the front of the brand new Kona? Well, in typical Hyundai fashion, it's a beautiful design, but the materials let it down just a little bit. I mean, everything falls nicely to hand. It looks good, but it's a bit scratchy in a lot of places for a $40,000 or more SUV. In the driver's seat, you get a nice steering wheel that comes right to hand. All your controls are where they're supposed to be, and you get an absolutely stunning 10-inch driver's display, which is beautiful, lag-free, and the graphics are probably some of the best in this side of the market. You also have a heads-up display, which gives you most of the items that you need when driving. Nice big infotainment display. Even though it is skewed away from the driver, you do get Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, wireless charging pad, heated seats, cooled seats, all your drive mode select, heated steering wheel, park sensor arrangements, most of the cubbies that you need for pretty much anything, Harman Kardon stereo, But if you want a sunroof, you can't have the black roof. And if you want the black roof, you can't have the sunroof. So you gotta pick one. So what's the difference between the Highlander and the inline on the interior? Well, honestly, not a lot. They're just a bit more racy feel. And they do that by putting this nice red stitching around the steering wheel and the seats, embossing the N in the logo on the seats, which is really nice touch. You do get a different shifter because this is a DCT transmission instead of the CVT, and you get a button for the locking center diff on the all-wheel drive system. But beyond that, it's pretty much exactly the same, which means it's a pretty nice place to be. Even down to the fact that there's no sunroof because this one has the black roof. So how's life in the back of the Kona? Well, for my 6-foot self, it's a little bit tight behind my own driving position, but headroom and shoulder room are perfectly fine, and foot room is pretty good too. Plenty of cubbies around for different things. If you wanna put some magazines back here, iPads or whatever. You also have a cup holder and armrest in the middle. And for creature comforts, you also have heated rear seats. 2 modes. So how's the boot in the back of the Kona? Well, once you get the tailgate open, it's pretty flat and of okay size, probably in comparison with the Puma and the CHR. They're not massive, but okay. The load floor does have a little storage organizer underneath it, which you can use for different things. And the seats do fall down flat if you have bigger items, though I wouldn't be going to Bunnings very often. So what's the tops, bottoms, and final verdict on the 2021 Hyundai Kona? Well, in the Highlander and inline premium form, they're fantastic machines overall, and I think the platform's pretty good. On the bottom, though, are a few corbels across the entire range. Some of the models tend to be a little bit pricey for what they offer, the inline premium, for instance, and some of the gearboxes aren't my favorite. The dual clutch in the inline tends to be clunky around town, and the CVT I just don't care for in general, but to be fair, it is a better CVT than most. On top, these cars are fantastic. They're great to drive, great to live with. The inline premium feels sporty and sharp in the hands, and with the addition of the all-wheel drive, it means you can take it out to the mountains or some adverse conditions and not be so scared. And the Highlander is great to live with around town. Very smooth, very economical, and just a great place to be. So my final verdict on the Kona is there's plenty of options, and you can't really go wrong. You want some spice? Get the inline. You want some smoothness? Get the Highlander. Choice is yours. Let's try this bit again. Hopefully the car won't tell me off for going too close to a speed camera or beep at me for no given reason because I'm trying to get a takeout. Hyundai, your safety systems are fantastic, but they keep interrupting me.